Good evening and welcome to episode 105 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama. It's a Thursday edition of the Private Property Podcast and it has been an eventful day. I'm sure if you follow us on our social media platforms, you certainly heard about our virtual property show. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, then I do urge you to go onto our social media platforms to find out more about that incredible show that is coming up in a couple of weeks that you definitely do not want to miss out. We'll be sharing a little bit more about what you can expect in the coming days, so do keep in tune with that one. But of course, we are talking property this evening, and one of the things that we're talking about that I think a lot of us can benefit from, especially if you're already a property investor, or perhaps you're looking to become a property investor, we're looking at 3 practical steps to take in order to become a professional investor. Probably, what are we talking about? What does it even mean to be a professional investor? We don't even mean going to school and having to study it, but certainly running your property business like a professional. And that's something that we always echo quite a lot. You also want to understand what is the skill set that you probably need that will set you above the rest. And of course, to help us better understand what these practical steps are and how we can navigate them and what we should be thinking about if we want to take our property business and our property portfolio to the next level. I'm joined this evening by somebody we've had before here on the Private Property Podcast, and that's Ewan, Rourke, who is the Managing Director of Think Startup. Before we start with Ewan, I actually want to know from viewers at home, if you're already a property investor, perhaps even a landlord, or you're looking into becoming a property investor, what skill set do you think you still need to get in order to take your portfolio or your property business to the next level? So you've probably been doing it maybe 2, 3, 4 years, and you maybe manage your own properties, so you deal with your tenants on a day-to-day basis, or perhaps you outsource it. What have you identified as that skill that you can see that I'm actually lacking in this one, and I still need to just do a bit more work in sharpening that skill, and that's what's going to take me to the next level. And if you're not already a property investor, I want to hear from you. What skill can you already off the bat see that this one I don't have, and that's why I'm a bit scared to make that leap and buy that first property? I know, for example, one of the skills that I know I'm not always that great at is handling my admin, and that's always a red spot for me. And even whatever project I go into, and instead of kind of shying away from it, I own up to it and kind of try to put in systems that mitigate that lack of having my admin on lock. So already that's the thing that I knew from the get-go, that going into property, I needed to work with people that can help me and be strong in something that I am not that strong in. I want to hear from you at home. What is that skill that you still want to sharpen in order to help you on your property investment journey? Well, to get started on this evening's conversation, I'm joined, as I said earlier, by Ewan. Ewan, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Good evening, Zama. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be with you tonight, and we're going to have a lot of fun.
And we definitely are, Ewan, because it's always so great chatting to you, because I think we go beyond the, kind of the everyday nuts and bolts of things that a lot of times we get into on the Private Property Podcast, but we also understand, I say, the psychology of what we talk about. And that's something that we sometimes, take for granted quite a bit. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on in our discussion. But I think before we even, get into what these practical steps is, I'm sure viewers at home are already thinking, okay, so what is the difference between kind of the normal investor? Maybe they thought I'm a normal investor, or you thought, look, I've been at it for a couple of years. I think I'm really good at this. I can call myself, a pro at investing. So how would you differentiate between these two?
Well, it's a great question, and we normally have to start this discussion by first explaining, obviously, what does a professional investor mean, right? Because I know most people probably listening has already invested, whether in 1, 2, 3, maybe 5 or 20 properties. And now the biggest thing, let's take driving, for example, right? What's the difference between most of us, like me, a standard driver, and a professional driver? Now, a professional driver, obviously, someone who gets paid to drive, right? And yes, a lot of people normally answer and say, well, they've got a very specific set of skills. they're really good at what they do, and obviously those things are acquired or required. However, the biggest thing is they are so good that they actually get paid to do it. And I wonder how many people listening tonight who have invested are actually getting paid. Is your property portfolio, your property investments actually making you money? Do you understand the different sectors where you can make money? Because cash flow is not the only way, right? There's different ways that you make money in property. Question is, do you know what they are and are you actually making money? So that's normally the fundamental to start and understand, am I doing this just because people say it's a good investment, or am I actually doing it to build something of value?
And Ewan, I really like the car analogy that you've just used right now, because I think if anything, this conversation is going to help viewers at home to understand that a lot of the viewers at home, you now know how to drive the car. You've certainly taken lessons, you've done your driver's license, the learners, the drivers, and you've probably been driving for a couple of years. This is essentially you identifying if you're able, unfortunately, I haven't done this one, but those defense driving lessons that you're sometimes able to take, which are really great. And I've heard people who've taken them saying that, look, it's also just sharpened the way that they drive on a day-to-day basis. So even though you know how to drive, you've probably driven, I think the longest trip I've driven was from here to Tofo in Mozambique. So even though you've got that skill and nobody doubts you with that, now you're almost taking it, a notch up, and you're saying, look, I know I can do this. I've done it. You can probably wake me up and I'll be able to tell you how you go about driving a car. But now, of course, we want to take it to the next level. So if you're already a property investor, you've identified, look, I'm running my portfolio pretty well, my business is doing well. And now we basically want to get a sense of then what sets you apart from, we'll say, the average Temba to the person who is just better than that, right? And perhaps then, Ewan, we should go to the first practical step that viewers at home should be taking when it comes to leveling up their property investment journey.
Yes. Oh, awesome. And the thing is, and these steps apply whether you first starting out now as a property investor, whether you, can I say, maybe dabbling in some property, maybe you have a few investments already, or whether you are, so to speak, already a pro and maybe an ultra wealthy guy. And I know the practical steps will ring true for you as well. And you can use them. You use all of these, whether on whichever level you are at. So using the analogy of driving a car, right? You remember probably the first time you started to learn to drive a vehicle, right? It was ridiculously difficult. It was hard. You were 16, 17, or 18 years old. But what's the first thing you did when you knew, I'm going to get my learners and I want to learn to drive a car? The first thing we do is we get a K53, right? We have to first learn what the rules of the road are, right? How to drive. Where does the indicator actually sit? Now, I know most people in our country still don't use the indicator, right? Now,
especially the BMW drivers. It's just decoration. I know a lot of the guys who drive German sedans, that's just decoration. They don't even use it.
Exactly. And especially with the new German cars with the lines that move, it looks really nice. So it looks like a decoration. So first you acquire the right knowledge, and that's the first practical step, right? So if I want to go into property, or I want to go from three properties to 5, or I want to go from 5 to 10, there's different levels of knowledge that I require, right? Because you might be at 3 properties right now, and for most people would think if you're already at 3, it's easy to go to 10. But if you bought all 3 of those places in your personal name, and your income, the 30% income that the bank gives you exposure to for borrowing money to you, maybe you're already fully maxed out and they don't want to borrow you any more money, right? That means there's different information you require. You need to learn about structuring because there's entities that you can buy properties in, right? So first practical step is you have to acquire the right knowledge. Once again, Zama also mentioned in the beginning of the session, is that you don't have to have a university degree. I don't have one, and you also don't need one, right? All you need is to understand that self-education is the most valuable thing that you can do, right? Jim Rohn's had a good quote. We said, formal education will give you a lifestyle or income, will give you a basic living, right? But self-education will make you a fortune. And that's really the difference between mediocre or just plain investors that's not really making money and professional investors, because they understand that they are students for life, that you can learn probably now and really become brilliant at investing in student accommodation, right? But you probably don't know as much about investing in commercial real estate in V&A waterfront in Cape Town or on the Atlantic seaboard, right? It's a different ball game. So you just need to acquire different knowledge to go into that lane. The same with driving. If you are a great driver at the moment, if you want to go pro, there's different information you require. You have to understand what oversteering means and understeering. There's a lot more technical difficulties when it comes to driving only, never mind property as well. So understand where you're at right now and what do you need to learn to go to the next level.
And in your, Evan, I'll play the other end of the stick, because I know a lot of guests that I sometimes have here in the Private Property Podcast do push a lot for, you know, self-education and not necessarily going the university route. I'll play the counter and say, you know, both are equally important. And in the event that you perhaps don't have, I think one of the big things is in the event where you don't have formal university education, then you know, that's fine. There are certainly ways that you're able to access property in the ways that some of the guests have been able to access property. And then I'll speak for the guys who do have university degrees, because I know that some of them are probably thinking how, but I went to school and here I am, perhaps using or not using the university degree. That's a different story altogether. And I'll probably, you know, fight just a little bit for the varsity guys, because I've walked down that path and continue to walk down that path. So I think whichever road you choose, you know, whether it's formal education or the University of Life, or even a merger of both, you know, there is no, we'll say, right or wrong way of becoming the right property investor. But certainly, you know, acquiring the right knowledge and knowing that that knowledge doesn't just lie in a textbook or in a classroom. I think that's the important thing. Because one of the things, Evan, that I have picked up sometimes is certainly from people who went the sort of university route, sometimes they kind of limit where they might find some of that knowledge. Whereas, you know, guys who've gone through the University of Life know that those lessons kind of come from different people, different aspects, and the value of it isn't necessarily more if you went the university route. And maybe the really great sweet spot, and maybe I say it's great because this is where I find myself in, is the ability to kind of merge both of them. So understanding that here's some stuff you've learned in the classroom, how do you then sort of apply that in an everyday sort of context, but also being open to the University of Life and the lessons that you're able to get. So really there's no discrimination when it comes to where you get this knowledge. And I think that's a very big takeaway for people who want to, you know, get that edge on their property journey. So whether you were not able to access university education or you were able to access it, I think either one of the two don't put you at a disadvantage. And I think that's a very important thing to be always you know, mindful of. So then, Ewan, we know that we're acquiring the right knowledge, and I know a lot of the viewers at home are quite eager when it comes to that. We've got, you know, the Private Property Podcast. They're tuned in daily. They engage on social media with us. You're also able to go to privateproperty.co.za. And of course, you're also able to get yourself a copy of the Property Guide, which is a very extensive, you know, property tool that you're able to use if you're interested in property. And it doesn't matter whether you're an investor, a seller, a buyer, or even a tenant, because I think a lot of people think tenants aren't as interested in trying to get to know more about property, but you're also able to learn quite a lot as a tenant when you get your copy of the Property Guide. And of course, you can get that copy by going to www.thepropertyguide.co.za and order it there online. You're also able to, you know, buy it at various bookstores. It is retailing for 150 on the Property Guide website. So do head on over there for a limited period. You'll be able to get it. So now you know where you can get some of this knowledge. I mean, yes, some of it is in books, some of it is in podcasts, you know, some of it is in some of the conversations that do continue happening. Even here on our social media platforms, we see some of the different viewers, who always comment on a daily basis and give us some of their insights when it comes to their property journey. And I think one of the insights that I definitely want us to get from our viewers at home, Ewan, is around the skill that they think that they're lacking in order for them to just take their property investment journey to the next level. So if you're a landlord, what's that skill that you've already identified as a skill that you still need to work on? And if you're a tenant, what is also that skill? Maybe you're a tenant and you're not really that great at communicating that well with your landlord, so sometimes you end up not documenting things properly. Perhaps that's something that you're struggling with. Do share it with us here down below. We're going to go for a quick break. When we come back, we'll be going through some of those, but also looking at the last 2 practical steps that you can take if you want to become a professional investor. We'll be back just after this. Welcome back to episode 105 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama Khumalo. This evening, we're looking at the 3 practical steps to take to become a professional investor. And of course, I'm joined by Ewan, who's the managing director of Think Startup. I want to hear from you at home. If you are a property investor, what is that skill set that you think you still need to sharpen in order to take your property portfolio, property business to the next level? And if you haven't started on your property investment journey, then what is that one skill set that you can already say off the bat, this is something that I know I'll very likely struggle with, and probably something that I need to do better in working on and making sure that it is as sharp as possible. I mean, I was sharing earlier on that for me, it's definitely my admin skills. I've kind of accepted that is something I'm not particularly great at. And where I can, there'll be an assistant and really a good team that's able to make up for that one area where I know I'm not that great. So sometimes it may even mean, making sure that people in my team are sticklers for certain types of detail, because I tend to just not look at that stuff that much. There's a different kind of detail that I'm more interested in. So being able to identify those kind of, skills gap, even as a property investor, is so important, because it really does help you elevate your property portfolio and your property business to the next level. We are, of course, taking your questions and comments at home. If you certainly want to share what that skill set is, then do send them through. We've got a question here, and before we even answer it, actually, I'm going to ask for Glenys to specify exactly, what she means, so we can get a nice, crisp answer. And the question is, what happens when you invest in a sectional title scheme where one is far too reliant on trustees and managing agents who don't necessarily have your best interests at heart? It feels like a conflict. Glenys, I'm just going to ask you to just, expand a little bit on what you mean by they don't share, they don't have your best interests at heart, because typically, the trustees are also owners in the actual sectional scheme. So I just want us to understand your question well, so that we're able to address it shortly here on air. And, Ewan, so the first step that you're sharing is you must acquire the right knowledge. Then what's that second step?
Right, Zama, the second step is, whether you're first starting off, whether you're building something big, is you really have to start looking at building an investment team for yourself, right? Now, what does that mean? Let's take the analogy of learning to drive a car. You got the K53, you did all the studying of what the rules of the road is, and you know now where the indicators of the car is. However, they don't let you climb into a car by yourself, right? You still need some guidance. So you have a trainer or a coach or mentor or someone whose programs you go to or the private property podcast that you listen to. It's people, companies, groups, programs that you can follow that's going to help you to learn faster, right? So let's say you're a learner driving, you're busy driving down the road because you still have to learn practically to drive. Your trainer next to you can quickly intercede and assist you if something goes wrong. Maybe you mistakenly start steering off the road, right? They can quickly readjust the steering wheel or pull up the handbrake because they, by this time, already know exactly what to do. So by building an investment team, if you haven't bought any properties yet, you're still starting off, your investment team can be like Zama as an example that you can follow and listen, get some advice, learn, do some programs, go to seminars or webinars, obviously, in this day and age, and read books and learn from people maybe who's walked that path before. And then obviously you're going to start speaking to a banker, right? So maybe one of the place where you bank at or one of the other banks, or a great option as well, maybe get a bond originator. It's someone that will apply for financing for you. And there's great bond originators out there that really can negotiate better interest rates on your behalf, because you may be still new, or maybe you already have 3 properties, but you still don't know how to negotiate with the banks. They do, they get paid for that. So you don't pay the bond originator, the banks pay them for getting that business. So build a small team, whether it's a bond originator, and then after you've bought your first place, you're going to want someone maybe to do your rentals for you. I mean, Zama, you mentioned admin isn't your strong point. That makes 2 of us. I don't like admin at all. So one of the things when you build an investment team is you really need to make sure that there's some stuff that you can maybe outsource.
Yeah.
So maybe like renting out a place, you can outsource that, or the maintenance. I've got a friend that says his hands are obviously round, that he confuses a drill and a screwdriver, right? So he doesn't like fixing his units. He outsources that.
Yeah.
And it will give you less stress. So once you've built this team, if you've worked with a bond originator that secures you a good deal, you can do your next place with them. Find companies like obviously lawyer firms that's going to be your conveyancing attorneys, that maybe after you've done a few deals with them, they give you a better discount rate on their fees. So this is what the team is for. You can get structuring specialists that will help you to structure your properties in entities that will assist you in buying more places. So if you're sitting at this moment with 1, 2, or 3 properties and the banks won't allow you to buy more places because you're buying them in your personal name, there's structuring for that. So if you structure your investments right, you can buy more places with the same salary that you currently are getting. So that's what an investment team is about, making sure that there's other people around you who's either done it before or they specialize in something, right? So you outsource specialist tasks and you outsource mundane tasks like admin, for example. Yeah. So that's really what building an investment team is all about.
And you know, viewers at home are already sharing some of the skills that they're great at, some of the skills that they struggle with. Of course, do keep those comments coming. I certainly want to hear from you. I'm glad to see that I'm not the only one who is not that great at admin. I see Nkate Kwahapa, one of our regular viewers, saying admin has never been my strong point. I end up not having lease agreements or not renewing them or not holding people accountable when they breach the lease agreement. So I'm glad to know that I'm not the only one who's struggling or who struggles with with having admin on lock. Another comment here from Shakong, who says, I'm terrible at negotiating. You know, Shakong, I think the thing with negotiating is it takes practice, and it also just takes knowing what is on the table. And I know that this is something that we've shared. So for example, are you trying to negotiate your interest rate? Or are you trying to negotiate on the purchase price? I found that I was really great at negotiating on the purchase price, but not so great on negotiating on the interest rate when I was still fairly new in my investment journey. So I was very great at identifying the properties, knowing how long they were on the market for, what the going rate is. So I was able to negotiate really well on the purchase price. But the moment it was around, negotiating the interest rate that I should be getting, and I already know probably 1 or 2 properties are not at the greatest interest rate. I could have, kind of pushed back. use the services of a bond originator who did a lot of that. I think had I known more, I may have pushed back just a little bit more to get a better deal. So it definitely is important, I think, to be able to identify those areas where you struggle, because then you're able to outsource those moments, as Ewan was, sharing, because that really is such an important one, because I think a lot of us do take it for granted. We've got Luto Tsiamo here on YouTube saying that I think most tenants, they don't read contracts and they get too excited about the place. It becomes a problem when they have to move out and they don't get the full refund, or where they don't get a full refund or a refund at all. And I think one of the things, Ewan, that perhaps might even set some landlords apart is to also be able to, if you're managing your own properties, for example, have the conversation with that prospective tenant before they sign around, key clauses in the lease agreement, because we have seen, of course, that is something that a lot of tenants typically get into. But also as a tenant, you must take it upon yourself, of course, to read your lease agreement, understand the terms and conditions. If there's something you don't understand, go back, keep asking, because more often than not, these things have a way of coming back to bite you, especially when things do go wrong. So then, Ewan, we've now acquired our knowledge, we've got our power team, whether it is, different people that you sort of tap into, or perhaps it is, people that you've already identified that you can, reach out to. I see even here, Ubuntu on YouTube asking, property investment book recommendation, please accept Start With Why by Simon Sinek. That's a really great book. Of course, The Property Guide is also a really good book, Buntu, so I think do get your hands on that one, because it really walks the path with you. So then what's the next step? And I like this next step, Ewan, because we can get stuck with the, with those first two steps, the acquiring the knowledge and almost wanting to get all your ducks in a row. So then what's that next step in order for us to elevate our property investment journey?
Oh, great. And now, once again, the driving analogy. So now you've learned everything you need to know. You're sitting in the car, you're sitting with a teacher next to you. The question is, what are you busy with and why are you doing it? And the reason why I'm saying that is, why is it so? Because it feels difficult, right? For most people learning to drive a car. I mean, you remember when you first started to learn, right? It felt like you're never going to be able to drive, right? It was difficult. Information overload, blind spot, mirror, blind spot, clutch, brake, gears, and the instructor speaking to you in the same time. And it feels so overwhelming, but you had the right motivation. You knew, if I do this for a year, hour in, hour out, put in my hours, put in the practice, I will get my driver's license, right? Why can't we have that same attitude when it comes to property investing? So a lot of people start reading books, start viewing a few places, and they feel it feels hard. It's information overload, right? And they just don't push through. They don't buy that first place. And the biggest thing that you have to do, and this is practical step number 3, is you have to take action. But you have to take consistent action. And that's what you already did to get your driver's license, right? And your motivation was, I am going to get my driver's license within a year and a half's time. That was a guarantee. But you knew all I had to do was learn what they're teaching me and put in the practice, right? Do the same with property. Whether you're at 0, 10, or 50 properties, exactly the same rules apply. So once you've bought that first place, and I know most people can relate to this listening right now, those of you who already bought a place, right? Once you bought that first place, you came out of this unknown, out of obscurity, because suddenly you gained additional knowledge out of the experience of buying that first place. And that's when wisdom actually starts to come, is what you learn out of the experience. And that is way more worth in gold than what you will read in a book, because you can read all the books in the world, but if you never buy that first place, you will never become an investor, right? So making sure to take consistent action, not just action, consistent action. If you have a New Year's resolution to get into a specific shape, let's say you want to be fitter, leaner, whatever the case might be, going to the gym on the 2nd of January and the 3rd of January is action. But that's not going to give you the results, right? You have to do it week in, week out, eat a specific way, and stay the course. The same with property investing. Once you've bought your first place, you've acquired the right knowledge, you have a great investment team, buy the first place. Then buy the second place and buy the 10th place. But you have to take that action consistently.
You know, Ewan, when you were talking about New Year's resolutions, a part of me, died a little bit, because I'm sure none of us would have anticipated what 2020 has had in store for us. And I do wonder if, certain people still have some of their New Year's resolutions and they're still on path to, ticking off some of those New Year's resolutions, because I think if anything, this year has changed things quite significantly for a number of us. Glenys has come back, and I'm going to say this one. Glenys, she was adding on to what she shared earlier. She's saying the managing agent is not experienced in sectional title or delivering a high standard, and she's saying, I'm great at governance, but the trustees won't tap into the other owner experiences. This is felt by many sectional title owners. You're either a trustee or you don't have a voice. And we do see that happening. And I think, Glenys, one of the things I'll definitely urge you to do, we had that conversation with Zelinda van der Merwe, a very fantastic conversation around community schemes. The one was around rules, and the other one was around things that people who want to buy into community schemes must know. The most recent conversation was episode 97, and we've spoken to her again on 2 other occasions. One of the things that you're able to do, of course, is go to your CSOS. So the Ombud is there, and there was a conversation we had around the Ombud, the community scheme Ombud, and the work that the community scheme Ombud does, and ways in which they mitigate in situations like these. So in the event where you're having issues with the managing agent or the trustees, or you feel that they're not necessarily performing their fiduciary duties, then I think do try and walk down that path. And typically when you go the CSOS route, you tend to find that the trustees, even the managing agents, do sit up and take you seriously as residents. But of course, also do get involved in the AGM, because one of the other things is to get other owners, especially if it's being felt by other owners, get them also in the mix, because then you're able to get a new crop of trustees who are able to effect the change that you want to see in that particular community scheme. And hopefully you'll be able to use your governance experience, as you're saying, you're very good at governance, in order to be able to assist in that community scheme. Now, Ewan, before we let you go, of course, want to wrap up with that last tip, and I know that it ties in with the the previous one that you said, but of course there's that golden thread with this particular one. What's that last step that viewers at home should just always be mindful of?
Well, absolutely, and it's based on consistency.
Yeah.
You absolutely have to be consistent. So, driving analogy, you already got your license, you're 18 years old, and you're excited. It feels like you're independent because you can drive. No one else has to be with you when you want to go to the shop. But now, 2-3 years later, you climb into the car and you start driving without thinking about it, right? How amazing is that? Because you can climb into your car right now and you don't think about blind spot, mirror, blind spot, because what happens is your brain starts blocking and batching those pieces of information together. So everything becomes subconscious. It's called the state of unconscious competence. It means you now do it without thinking about it, right? So how does someone go from being that good, like us, driving without thinking about it, to becoming a professional, let's say a Formula One driver, right? All they do is they just repeat this process. So they go and acquire different knowledge, right? More specialized knowledge of what does it mean to go into a corner if you drive around a racetrack? What speed can you do it at? What does oversteer and understeer mean? So what speed do I need to enter into the corner, and how do I exit it, right? Without rolling the car. So it's specialized knowledge. So if you're at 50 properties right now and you feel like you're hitting a ceiling, there's different knowledge that you require. There's maybe different mentors, coaches, or trainers that you need to speak to, people that maybe have 400 or 500 units, and they can tell you, listen, I was there as well. So maybe switch this, change this, or adapt this, right? So once again, they just look for different people to listen to, people who's done what they wanted to do before. And then what do they do the next thing? They then just take that same action. But the consistency is key. Remember, the powerful thing about property is the compounding effect, right? Now, compounding is only effective if you put something into that account every single month. You can't compound anything. It doesn't matter how great the interest rate is. Nothing can compound if you can't add something to it on a frequency. So whether it's month to month, week, or yearly, you have to have a consistency, a frequency of adding something to it. So make sure if you set yourself a goal, you want to end up with 50 properties one day. Put yourself a target that you'll buy one place every second year, and then maybe after 4 years, every year, and after maybe every 6 months. And before you see, maybe sitting with 12, 14, or 20 properties, and those then actually start compounding, and that is how you build ultra wealth.
Well, Ewan, we are going to leave it there this evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Zama. Appreciate it.
And that was Ewan Rourke, who is the Managing Director of Think Startup. Well, folks, that's it from us here on the Private Property Podcast team. And of course, we're back again tomorrow. It's going to be the Friday edition of the show. I do hope that we're going to keep this conversation, continuing. I think we definitely want to hear what are some of the weak spots when it comes to your skill set that you've picked up, that you have when it comes to managing your own property portfolio, or growing or scaling your property portfolio. And I think I actually like the note that Glennis has kind of pointed us in, but also what's the thing that you're really good at? Because it's one thing to identify some of the weak spots, but I also want to see maybe what are some of the things that you're really great at, that you think you've basically got it on lock. You understand how this is done, and you can do it in your sleep, and it's one of the golden threads or the golden nuggets that bring in life when it comes to you running your property business. I certainly want to hear from you. We'll continue the conversation on our social media platforms. Of course, if you do want to participate on the competition that we're running on our social media platforms, and this one is on our Facebook page, then do go over on our Facebook page. We have shared the competition details where we want you to review our page on Facebook. Write the review, give us a nice 5-star, tell us what you appreciate about the Private Property page, and of course you stand a chance of walking away with a 500 Rand cash voucher. You know how much we love giving away cash here on the Private Property Podcast. Well, that's it from me, Zama. We're back again tomorrow evening. You definitely don't want to miss that one, and as usual, hoping that you're staying home and staying safe. We'll be back tomorrow evening. Welcome to the first edition of the Private Property Podcast. As usual, we'll be bringing you experts to help us navigate this COVID-19 crisis, whether you're a landlord or a tenant, or somebody perhaps even looking to get into the property market and don't understand how this crisis is actually going to affect your property journey.
Yes, we certainly do find ourselves in very, very interesting and very unique times.
What I found in my experience that in terms of buying repossessed property, I've had a lot of my wins because of easy sales.
So you want to have good credit on your credit profile. You definitely don't want to have no credit profile on your credit profile. This is what we determine as a thin credit file.
Accrued value during the course of the marriage will have to share with the other spouse, depending on what their contract says, the assets they gain during the course of the marriage. So that's basically what it means.
We are profiling young people in property. You all know how excited I am to talk about property, but I even get more excited when I talk to my peers.
Millennials and young professionals are money conscious. We understand that money doesn't grow on trees, and so we're trying to find ways to accommodate ourselves.
who are the parties in the buying and selling process, right? So you have the buyer, you have the seller, you have the bank, and you have an estate agent.
Good evening and welcome to episode 66 of the Private Property Podcast.
Probably top of the list when you're sourcing a new tenant is that word of a credit check. Very, very, very important. That's your starting point.
You want to create a savings buffer for you to be able to look at investments that are longer term.
You know, those contracts, those offer to purchase have been drafted by legion of lawyers, and I can make fun of lawyers because my wife is a lawyer, okay? So,
welcome to episode 80 of the Private Property Podcast.
Out of everything we've discussed tonight, I think your managing agent is critical because they're the custodian of the relationship. They're the ones that are managing the affair.
We are there to analyze a market and to look at the behavior of buyers and sellers in the market.
Be able to market yourself, because in essence, real estate and as an agent, it is you that we first buy before we buy the company that you're with.